on my mind, god damn it, I can shake it. Money on my mind, money on my mind, money on my mind, god damn it, I can shake it. Money on my mind, money on my mind, money on my mind, god damn it, I can shake it. Money on my mind, money on my mind, money on my mind, god damn it, I can shake it. Money on my mind, money on my mind.
Yes, all we care about is some party, keeping them good vibes in the air now. Feel it high. Everyone up in the club is down with the rocket. Yes, all we care about is some party, keeping them good vibes in the air now. Feel it high. Everyone up in the club is down with the rocket.
Yo, DJ, are you done mixing yet?
Your DJ has only just begun.
This is a journey into sound.
Extra, give it to ya. Fuck ways for you to get it on your own. Extra, deliver to ya. Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real. It's a non-stop, hip-hop, stainless steel.
This is a journey into sound.
Extra, give it to ya. Extra, give it to ya.
A journey which along the way will bring to